Education is always a key issue at election time, but in 2010 it's absolutely centre stage. Every party is claiming it can improve schools and raise standards. But who will get your vote? Welcome to Election 2010, Testing the Parties. Hello and welcome to the programme. We've brought together a panel of teachers, school staff and parents to grill representatives of the three main parties to get to the facts behind the promises. In the hot seat is Conservative MP Nick Gibb, Shadow Education Minister. He'll be facing our panel of school staff. Let me introduce them. Catherine Myers is the Royal Air Force Head Teacher of the Year in a secondary school in London. She's Executive Head of Bishop Challoner Catholic Collegiate School, Britain's first federated school. Steve Mills won Primary Teacher of the Year at the Teaching Awards 2009. He works at the William Ransom Primary School in Hertfordshire. Teaching Assistant Trish Gribble is Deputy Director of the Sixth Form at Stoke Damerel College in Plymouth and is the TDA's Teaching Assistant of the Year. And Chair of Governors Spiros Ilia was awarded DCSF Governor of the Year for his work at Bryndish and Hither Green Primary Schools. He's also a professional tutor for Teach First. Welcome to you all and to Nick Gibb. Now, before we take the first question, let's have a look at the Conservatives' recent education pledges. This was David Cameron speaking at the party's spring conference in February.
We are going to bust open the state monopoly. We are going to say to the churches, the charities, the voluntary bodies, come in and set up new great schools, sometimes small schools, so that we can have the diversity, the choice and the competition that's there in the private sector for the wealthy. I want it in the state sector for everyone, especially the poorest in our country. And it's not magic what a good school looks like. We all know it. It's a school with a uniform, with a discipline, with children who get up from their seats when an adult walks into the room, where teachers set and teach by ability, where we get the basics right. These are things we should have in all our schools for all our children. To those who say, well, Labour tried some of these things, but it hasn't happened, I would say this. Imagine what you could achieve if you're not having to placate some left-wing Labour MPs, if you're not having to cut deals with the teaching unions, if you're prepared to be clear to local education authorities about what their role would be. Just imagine what you could achieve. And we will have the attention to detail that has been so lacking. Michael Gove and I were looking at the history curriculum recently for 11 to 13-year-olds. There are only two historical figures mentioned, Wilberforce and Equiano. But what happened to Churchill? What happened to Florence Nightingale? What happened to the heroes of the Industrial Revolution? Britain has got the proudest, the most incredible history of any country in the world. Is it too much to ask that we teach our children about it?
David Cameron there on his party's plans for new schools free of local authority control, for tougher discipline and a greater emphasis on important figures in British history. So, Nick Gibb, Swedish schools and Churchill, what else have you got on offer?
Well, the key theme behind our reforms is trusting professionals. And one of the hallmarks of Labour over the last 13 years is this over-centralised, prescriptive approach to education policy, the fortnightly Lever Arch files landing on the desk of the head teacher, the initiatives that keep coming from the department week after week. And those initiatives all require somebody to read them, somebody to implement them, meetings to be held, and we think that's the wrong approach. We need to have more freedom for professionals, more autonomy for schools, and that's the essence of both the Swedish model, as it's called, and also our anti-bureaucratic approach to education policy.
So freedom is your overriding theme. Well, let's see what our panel's questions are all about. Let's begin with Catherine.
Nick, the Conservative Party has promised to exempt the best schools from Ofsted so that they can concentrate, so that Ofsted can concentrate on problem schools. Surely this is as illogical as saying that a best car doesn't need an MOT. So how can you ensure that these schools who are exempt from Ofsted don't become complacent?
It's a very good question. outstanding schools, good schools that are exempt from Ofsted won't be exempt forever. There'll be a traffic light system of warning. So, for example, if the results start to decline, if there's a large turnover of teachers, we'll look at the truancy rates, and if there's a complaint from parents, all those things will trigger an Ofsted inspection, which will then indicate whether the school is still outstanding and therefore exempt from future Ofsted inspections. But we believe very strongly that the resources of the state need to be focused on those schools that are underperforming, so we can make sure over time that all children from wherever they go to school are attending a good school. That's the focus of our reforms.
You happy with that, Catherine?
If you are going to bring about a traffic light system in the recession, in times of not having sufficient funds, how would you pay for this? And wouldn't the money be better spent in schools or in inspection?
Yes, well, we're not intending to ratchet up the Ofsted's budget. The point is, given Ofsted's limited
Are you intending to
resources,
reduce it?
No, we're talking about focusing those resources into areas where it's better spent. It's better for the time of inspectors to be spent in poorer schools that are struggling than in schools that are doing well. But of course we have to make sure that they are still doing well, and that's what the traffic light warning system's all about.
Are there some areas that you'll be asking Ofsted to spend less time, and indeed to stop looking at? Because you've talked about them focusing on teaching and learning more.
Yes, there are 18 different categories in the Ofsted inspections. We want to reduce that to simply 4. Leadership, teaching, well-being, safeguarding, and also attainment. Those are the 4 key things that Ofsted should be looking at.
OK, thank you very much.
Can I
Steve,
also say
we'll go to Steve first, we may come back to other questions in a moment.
Thanks, Nick. I'm interested to hear your proposal about allowing head teachers to pay more for good staff at their school. Currently, schools work on an average salaries formula, which means those schools with more experienced staff, a stable workforce, end up having to pay or have less money for the other parts of the education. How will you fund or make more money available for schools with more experienced staff?
Well, again, this is all about trusting professionals, trusting head teachers. We want to give them a greater flexibility to be able to pay teachers more so they can attract the best staff to their school. So what we intend to do over time is to get more and more flexibility for head teachers so that they can run their school in the way they see fit to raise standards. And
They
that's
won't
really
have
the
flexibility unless they've got the money to do it, will they? That's the key point that Steve's making.
That's it. The budget is set, and X% is used for teachers' salaries. If the schools have an experienced staff, that percentage is higher than in a.
So they can distribute the cake as they like, but the size of the cake is what you're
That's
asking
it.
about, isn't it?
Well, that's going to be an issue for any government after the election, faced with constraints. But we do intend to make sure that money goes to the front line, will be safeguarded. And the key thing is that this is an issue for head teachers' professionalism, because if you believe that more experienced staff who are more expensive are delivering the higher quality of education that they want to deliver to parents, then that's what they should be doing.
Catherine, I mean, you're a head teacher running budgets. Does this sound feasible to you, that you can, if you do have more teachers who are at the more experienced end, will you have any flexibility left to pay some more?
I think that as far as funding's concerned, the budgets just now have allowed us to have lots of innovation and lots of projects running. Teachers are becoming more expensive, but I presume that the more expensive teachers actually are delivering the results.
OK, so just
So
briefly
it really
on
is a
that,
question of balance.
how will you deal with that, Nick, that issue that more expensive teachers, more expensive because they're more experienced, and you want more experienced teachers, but there's only so much money to go around. You aren't going to be able to offer lots more extra money, are you?
No, and no government after the election is going to be able to promise more money. And whatever Labour say, that is the reality of the position. But what we want to make sure is that teachers have the greater flexibility as possible so they can juggle their budgets as they see fit. And it is a balance, of course, between you pay a highly experienced professional, you have to pay them the going rate, but you get the results from that.
Okay.
And it's an issue for head teachers to decide, not for bureaucrats in Whitehall to decide for you.
Let's move to the next question. Trish.
Okay, Nick, your manifesto document, Mending Our Broken Society, says that you will make it easier for teachers to use reasonable force to deal with violent incidents. Why is it in the 21st century we're talking about using reasonable force in the classroom?
Well, you raise a good question. Why is it? But the reality is that 1,000 pupils a day are suspended for verbal abuse or violent abuse in our classrooms, and teachers are facing this, and we have to give teachers and head teachers the powers they need to be able to deal with that. And you know, children cannot learn unless they're in a very stable, you know this, calm atmosphere. And if teachers feel they don't have the powers, or the wording of the legislation is too obscure that they fear taking action to deal with these disruptive pupils and to deal with potential violent situations, then we won't be able to tackle this persistent disruption in too many classrooms.
I get the impression, Trish, behind your question is you don't think that force is the answer to this.
I'd like to think it wasn't, because I deal with pastoral care within a community college. I'm concerned as to what you would define reasonable force as.
Okay, how are you going to define it? Because that's always the difficulty, isn't it, Nick?
It is, but what we need to be sure is that teachers don't feel that if there is a violent child in the classroom and they can't use reasonable force, some teachers feel that whatever they do, they then have to prove that they acted within the law. We want to reverse the presumption so that teachers are assumed that, you know, if they confiscate an item that's banned by the school rules or they search for that item, that will be within the rules. And the problem at the moment is that the boot is on the other foot, and this is intimidating teachers from taking reasonable action to deal with those situations, which we hope will be rare.
Spiros.
Nick, my question is to do with educational change. Now, ever since the creation of the national curriculum, and especially since 1997, change has happened very, very thick and fast, and more often than not without enough time to evaluate that change. As a consequence, a lot of it has therefore not been value for money, and some of it has been negative in terms of the educational attainment of the child. What is your party going to do to make sure that doesn't happen in the future?
Yes, I mean, I do agree with you. There has been this initiative ITIS from the government, which seems to be more driven by the next press release and the next day's headlines in the TES or in the national papers than by a long-term set of direction for the direction of travel of education policy, and we need to get away from that.
Can you resist that? I mean, you've already been telling us how we should be teaching history and what sort of methods for teaching reading. It's going to be very difficult to resist it, isn't it?
It's difficult for every politician to stop meddling, but the whole direction of our policy is not to meddle, is to trust professionals, to give back the autonomy to the teaching profession that's been taken away. Of course, there will be some imperatives of a future Conservative government, such as reading. But you know, we want to just make sure we make our reforms, give a long lead time for implementing reforms, and then leave be. Let teachers just get on with the job of teaching and not have to worry that in 2 weeks' time another Lever Arts file will arrive with a new initiative.
In a word, Spiros, are you happy?
Well, my question was to do with evaluation, and I appreciate what you're saying in terms of implementation, but the cycle of implementation and evaluation often takes at least 18 months. So therefore, any major change has to be given at least 18 months before it can even be judged to succeed or not. Okay.
Letting schools get on with the things that you're asking them to do. Well, we've also been asking for your questions on Twitter. And here's one from Bob Harrison, who's the Vice Chair of Governors at Northern College in Barnsley. Now, he asks, what are your intentions to fund the BSF pipeline of over 500 schools which will not have contracts signed before a general election? What would your intentions be towards them?
Well, we do believe in capital spending on renovating schools. It's very important that the fabric of buildings in our schools is as the highest possible quality. But Labour have already in their budget announced a 50% cut in capital spending over the next 3 years. So whoever's elected after the election will be facing these problems. And I don't know where...
But they would have spent an awful lot of money on fees preparing for this. If they're still in the middle of that, if they're in that pipeline process, you can't give them any guarantees. Is that what you're saying?
No, we will certainly honour commitments that have been made, absolutely. And, you know, but any government coming in after the election is going to face this problem of a 50% cut on Labour's figures in the capital spending. So when Ed Balls waves
well, I don't want to get too much onto Labour's figures, but the key question here is, but you're saying so long as, even if contracts have not been signed, but if it's in the pipeline, you would honour the BSF?
No, we've said that if contracts are ever in place, we will honour them and we'll look at...
Otherwise...
Yes, and it's difficult for an opposition to be more... to be clearer on this, because we are faced with not seeing the books. when Labour refuses to have a comprehensive spending
Okay.
review, it's terribly difficult. But we do believe in capital spending on schools. But the whole country is faced with Labour's
And you can't give them a
inheritance of
guarantee
a
at this
50%
stage.
cut in capital spending. So that's as far as I'm able to go.
All right, thank you very much. Now, to hear what others want to know from the politicians, our reporter Laura Turner went to speak to staff at the City Academy in North London. Here are their questions for Nick Gibb.
My name's Dion White, I'm a literacy coordinator. My question goes out to Nick Gibb. I would like to know, why are you reintroducing phonics into literacy? Thank you.
Hello, my name's Gareth Lewis. I'm a teacher of English and Media Studies. I'm also a staff governor at the City of London Academy, Islington. My question for Nick Gibb is, what can your party offer in terms of equality of opportunity for children as they begin their lives and go through their compulsory education?
Hi, my name's Faye Benson. I'm an NQT Humanities teacher. I would like to ask Nick Gibb about his free school proposals. Will you be allowing parents to set up their own free schools in areas where there are already surplus school places? And if so, do you accept that this will unfairly disadvantage those people from the poorest and most challenging backgrounds by creating a two-tier system?
So, Nick, let's take those questions in order, shall we? So the first one about reintroducing phonics.
Well, of course, that's already in the national curriculum. It came in after the original Rose Review into teaching of reading.
But you're specifying which type of phonics, aren't you?
Well, Rose did as well, systematic synthetic phonics. And we want to just make sure that teachers have the right training and right materials to make sure that it's well taught in the early years of primary school, because unless we get reading right, the rest of education fails.
And you're convinced that's right for every child? That type of phonics is
Well,
right for every child?
if schools believe they have a better method and that they can get children decoding and fluent readers in other methods, fine, but there'll be tests to make sure that children are fluent readers. We know we're not prescribing beyond the existing law what and how children should be taught, but what we are saying is that we want to enable teachers to have the materials, to have the training so that they can use systematic synthetic phonics in the teaching of reading, which all the evidence from the Clackmannanshire study to West Dunbartonshire to the National Reading Panel in the States shows is the most effective way of teaching children to read.
Okay, the second question there was about what can you offer in terms of equality of opportunity, particularly for the youngest children?
Well, that is one of the key drivers behind our education policy, to make sure that the quality of education for all children, particularly in areas of deprivation, where in many areas of deprivation the quality of education is not as good as it should be, which is why we want a pupil premium to focus money, particularly in areas of great deprivation.
And will that pupil premium, that presumably means money coming from somewhere else in the education budget, though, doesn't it?
It does, but we are determined to make sure that all our reforms are geared to ensuring that children from the poorest area receive a high quality education, because if you're talking about equality of opportunity and social mobility, education is the only way out of poverty. And there's no other way, unless you win the lottery or become, an England football player. It's the only way out of poverty. We just need to make sure that we give those opportunities in every area of the country.
The third question there was about policy that's had a lot of attention, your free schools idea. But the crunch point we identified there is what happens when there are already surplus places in the area? Isn't that going to make it difficult and, as they put it, a two-tier system, and also actually rather wasteful if you've already got surplus places in an area?
Well, there's a two-tier system now, and if you have money, you can either buy private education or you can move house to an area, an intake of a good, high-performing school. We want to change that so that every child from whatever area they live in has a good education. And in fact, surplus places is an indication of unhappiness with the quality of education in an area. So counterintuitively, we believe those are particularly the areas where we want a diversity of provision and new schools to come in and set up.
But it could mean a slow death for other schools, couldn't it?
No, not necessarily. If schools are underperforming, there'll be a quick death, to be frank. And we want to bring in new schools in those areas at the moment where there's really very little choice for parents in some parts of our inner cities.
OK, thank you. Let's go back to our panel for some more questions. Catherine again.
Nick, the Conservative Party wants more schools to opt to become academies. How can you justify giving some schools better resources than others, and how does this affect equal opportunities for all children?
Well, they won't get more money than other schools. All they will have is control over their total budget, an element of which at the moment is controlled by the local authority. But of course they'll have to fund the things that are currently provided free from local authorities. So the essence is that academies will be funded on the same basis as community schools.
Would you want your school to become an academy? And what would you want to know from the Conservatives if that was on offer?
I would want to know what Nick has to offer.
In terms of money or in terms of freedom?
Just the whole, well, we have a lot of freedom as a voluntary aided school.
Already.
We do have
So what more
lots
could
of
you offer?
freedom.
They've already got freedom as a voluntary aided school. What more would there be to make it attractive to become an academy, as you'd like more schools to become?
Well, more freedom, because we want to return academies the freedoms that have been lost over the last years. You're right, at the moment, of course, VA schools have more freedoms than the current regime for academies, but we want to extend those freedoms so they go beyond the freedoms that you have as a VA school, a freedom over the curriculum, etc., being able to, freedom over employment of staff and so on. Freedom
In a word, are there more freedoms you want?
I would, not really.
No, you're happy with what you've got at the moment?
In the past 10 years, we've been very happy with
As a
the
voluntary
way
aided
we
school.
have allowed, we have been supported and allowed to develop.
Okay,
I'm
now
still
move on now
interested.
to Steve now.
Yeah.
Many teachers would agree that testing is useful at times, but the distraction that comes with the pointless publication of league tables might detract from the quality of the education that some are receiving. How would your new robust and rigorous exam system, what would that look like, and what would you do with the results?
Well, first of all, starting at the top end, at the secondary school, we want to restore the link between A-levels and university academics, so that, because they are one of the key people that are complaining about the A-level. So we restore that academic link between A-levels and the universities. Moving down the age range, the Key Stage 2 tests, we hear from teachers a lot of complaints about the content of those tests, the writing in particular, and the genres that suddenly appear in these tests at the last minute. We want to look at that to make sure that it does test fluency in reading, fluency in arithmetic and writing, the key functional skills that children should have when they leave primary school. In terms of publication of those results, I do think that this is an important accountability framework. The end of primary school and the end of compulsory school education are the 2 points when we do have to have the publication of the results. And even if we didn't want to, we live in a freedom of information era, so even if we said we weren't going to publish those results, a newspaper would just submit freedom of information requests to all schools and they would publish it. So we're in a different era now where everything in the state sector is subject to transparency and openness.
Sure. How are we going to reduce those schools that teach to the test, so to speak, and they're so worried about the league tables that history and geography and the arts,
The narrowing of the curriculum.
That's it,
How do you
narrows
stop
down
the
and
teaching to the
we
test,
focus on English and maths.
Or do you not mind that?
No, we do mind that. It's, the schools that teach the test tend not to be the schools that get the kind of results that your school is getting, to be frank. We need children to have a rounded education with history, geography, science, as well as maths and English. How do we do that? We just have to encourage schools to deliver that kind of education.
And with free schools, you can't go telling them what to do, can you? I mean, that
no,
would
but
come
parents
across your other policies.
No, but parents will have a lot more say in the choice of school with the new providers coming in, and the schools will be asked to set out their curriculum on their website, so parents have a genuine choice of where they send their children to school.
Trish.
Yes, not all young people are academic. They're not all going to get A's to C's. So how can we recognise and value what these students can do in this target-driven culture that we have?
No, it's a very good question, and we do need to enable schools to provide a range of qualifications. The BTEC has a very good reputation, and we need to encourage that. And schools may well want to trumpet their expertise in delivering, for example, the engineering diploma, and we want to encourage that, which is why we want to separate them out and get rid of the equivalences in the GCSE
You're a bit lukewarm
tables.
about diplomas, aren't you? That's at least the impression people have got, that you're not that keen. Do you want to correct that?
Well, it's teachers that are telling us that they are overcomplicated, that they are driving the timetable in many instances, where they're forced to provide all 17 lines, which means that they have to have these big blocks of history in one afternoon to enable...
But it's reform, not abolition, you're talking about.
It's reform,
Okay.
and we're also going to remove the compulsion to provide all 17 lines, so schools can specialise in the diplomas they wish to provide.
Okay. Spiros.
Nick, education is so vital to the well-being of a society that inevitably all political parties want to get their hands on it. However, as a consequence, it often ends up being a football, if you like, for political point scoring, very often at the expense of what's best for the child. Will your party ever have the courage to actually take education out of the political system and so that politicians can't get their clutches onto it?
Throw the ball back to the teachers then.
Well, that's the essence of our reforms. It's trusting professionals, it's about giving schools more autonomy and freedom. The problem is, though, if you have a state-funded education system, which we have, and we will always have, there will always be the involvement of democracy and politicians in the provision of that education. The key, though, is to resist the temptation to meddle every 2 weeks and to announce things because it makes a very good headline in the newspapers the next day. That's what's got to be resisted. And I think I believe that an incoming Conservative government, if we are fortunate to be elected, won't take that short-termist approach.
You have one quick comeback. Is there any area you want to guarantee you won't interfere
Just simply
with?
say that can still happen, but you can use a school model where you have the school being, or education run by professionals, but you have a governing body where politicians can be on. But that would negate the direct access of the politicians'
Leave it to the governing
clutches.
body. That's where the politicians can have influence rather than from central diktat.
Well, exactly, which is really what our free schools approach is. It's about bringing in new providers who are completely independent of bureaucrats, whether they are local government or national government, and they will survive or fail depending on how many parents are attracted to that school for their pupils.
Thank you very much, Nick Gibb, and to our panel. And that's just about all we've got time for. Now, don't forget you can keep up to date with the latest education news on the Teachers TV News website. That's at teachers.tv/news. Or join the debate on Twitter. Just search for Teachers TV News. I'll be back with the Labour and Liberal Democrat election programmes. Do join me then.